Three Russian helicopters are on fire at Kirovsky Air Base in Crimea, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally burning on the tarmac. A Mi-8, a Mi-26, and a Mi-28 combat helicopter, all destroyed in a single overnight strike executed by the Security Service of Ukraine on June 28, 2025. And right alongside them, a Panzer S-1 air defense system, the very weapon that was supposed to stop this from happening, obliterated in the same attack. Let that sink in for a moment. The helicopter base that Russia depends on to project rotary wing power across the Crimean operational theater, to sustain logistics, to conduct evacuation operations, to maintain military presence across the occupied peninsula, that base was penetrated, its aircraft were destroyed, its own air defense was taken out in the same strike package. This is not a story about three helicopters. It is a story about the structural collapse of Russia's assumption that Crimea constitutes a protected rear area immune from the kind of precision attrition that dismantles military capability from the inside out. Pull the lens back and understand what we are witnessing. When Russia seized Crimea in 2014 and then accelerated its military buildup there after 2022, the peninsula was not conceived as a front line. It was conceived as a fortress, a strategic rear base from which offensive operations could be projected northward into Ukraine, eastward toward the Sea of Azov Theater, and seaward across the Black Sea approaches. Kirovsky Military Air Base in eastern Crimea was a critical node in that fortress architecture, a rotary wing hub supporting logistics, reconnaissance, extraction operations, and combined arms coordination for Russian forces across the southern axis of the war. The Russian assumption was simple, and it was wrong. Geographic depth equals operational safety. The Kerch Strait, the air defense rings layered around Crimean installations, the distance from Ukrainian-controlled territory, these factors were treated by Russian military planners as reliable buffers. For the first year of the full-scale invasion, that assumption held with sufficient credibility that Crimea functioned as the rear area Russia intended it to be. But what you are witnessing now in the systematic destruction of Crimean military assets, including at Kirovsky on the 28th of June 2025, is the progressive invalidation of every assumption that underwrote that design. Here is what the mainstream framing consistently misses. When outlets report on the Kirovsky strike as a tactical success, 3 helicopters destroyed, 1 air defense system neutralized, they are measuring the correct things in the wrong frame. The question is not how many helicopters were destroyed on a given night. The question is what their destruction reveals about the structural vulnerability of Russia's entire Crimean military architecture. And the answer to that question is far more consequential than the tally of burning fuselages. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level. Rotary wing aviation in the Crimean context serves functions that fixed-wing aircraft cannot replicate at short notice. Mi-8 transport helicopters are the workhorses of intra-theater logistics. They move personnel, supplies, and communications equipment between nodes that are not efficiently connected by road or rail in an increasingly contested environment. The Mi-26, the world's largest production helicopter, is irreplaceable for heavy lift operations, equipment transport, and the kind of large-scale logistics movement that sustains a garrison force over time. The Mi-28 Havoc is a dedicated attack and reconnaissance platform, providing armed overwatch and close air support capability that armor and infantry operating in the Crimean theater depend on when air superiority cannot be assumed. You do not lose 3 platforms from 3 different operational categories in a single strike by accident. You lose them because the base they were sitting on became killable. And Kirovsky became killable because Ukraine's drone development program has systematically extended the effective operational range and precision of its strike assets throughout 2024 and 2025 to a degree that Russian defensive posture failed to account for. Now here is the hidden military variable that changes the entire analysis. The destruction of the Panzer S-1 in the same strike package is not incidental. It is the operative doctrinal lesson. Russia's Panzer S-1 is a short to medium-range gun missile system designed specifically to defeat the kind of low-altitude, small-signature threats that drone strikes represent. The fact that it was destroyed alongside the helicopters it was deployed to protect means one of 2 things, and both conclusions are damning. Either the Panzer was not in an operationally ready state when the attack arrived, which speaks to maintenance failures, crew readiness problems, or command and control degradation within the Crimean air defense architecture. or the attack was sequenced and packaged in a way that overwhelmed or bypassed the Pantsir's engagement envelope before it could respond effectively, which speaks to the growing doctrinal sophistication of Ukraine's strike cell methodology. The satellite imagery released in the aftermath confirmed what the initial reports described. The destruction was not ambiguous. It was not a near miss. It was direct, confirmed damage to multiple high-value platforms at a base that Russia considered sufficiently defended to house strategic rotary assets in the first place. What happens next changes everything because Kirovsky does not stand alone in the pattern it represents. It is part of a larger sequence. Understand this. By mid-2025, Ukrainian intelligence and strike operations had accounted for a verified accumulation of fixed-wing aircraft, air defense systems, and naval assets across the Crimean Peninsula that cumulatively amounted to the degradation of Russia's forward military depth in the Black Sea operational theater. Satellite imagery documented at Kirovsky precisely what the Security Service of Ukraine claimed: the helicopters destroyed, the Pantsir eliminated, the tarmac scarred. Russia did not publicly contest the evidence because the evidence was visible to anyone with commercial satellite access. And it gets even more serious from here, because you cannot understand the significance of Kirovsky in isolation from the broader operational context that surrounds it. By the summer of 2025, Crimea was not merely a base under intermittent pressure. It was a base under systematic attrition. Ukrainian drone capabilities had expanded from short-range tactical harassment to operationally meaningful deep penetration strikes. The Security Service of Ukraine, Ukraine's intelligence arm, not just its military, had demonstrated in Operation Spiderweb on June 1, 2025, just weeks before the Kirovsky strike, that it could reach Russian military aviation assets not just inside occupied Ukraine, but deep inside Russia itself, across 5 time zones, hitting strategic bombers at Olenya in Murmansk Oblast, at Belaya in Siberia, at Dyagilevo near Ryazan, at Ukrainka and Ivanovo-Severny. Those strikes destroyed or seriously damaged 12 to 13 Russian aircraft by U.S. assessment and hit 41 total by Ukrainian assessment, including Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers. If Ukraine could reach the bomber fleet of the Russian Air Force in Siberia, the question was never whether it could reach Kirovsky. The question was when and how comprehensively. The answer came on June 28. Pull the lens back further. The broader lesson operating here is one about the relationship between assumed sanctuary and actual survivability. Russian military doctrine has long relied on depth as a force multiplier, the idea that rear area infrastructure, aviation, and logistics nodes can function continuously because they sit beyond the effective range of adversary strike systems. Ukraine has been invalidating that doctrine layer by layer since at least 2022, and accelerating that invalidation throughout 2025. What began as attacks on the Kerch Bridge moved to attacks on naval vessels in Sevastopol harbor, progressed to fixed-wing aircraft at Crimean airfields, and is now extended to the systematic dismantling of rotary-wing capability at eastern Crimean bases. Each layer of assumed safety that Russian planners built their operational architecture around has been stripped away by Ukrainian adaptation, faster, cheaper, and with greater precision than Russian defensive systems have been able to counter. The Panzer S-1 destroyed at Kirovsky was not just a weapon system. It was the symbol of a promise Russia made to itself, that short-range layered air defense would make its installation survivable in a drone-saturated battle space. That promise was incinerated on the same tarmac as the Mi-28 it was supposed to defend. Here is the larger pattern this confirms. Russia's Crimea strategy was always built on a 2-layer logic. The first layer was denial, make Crimea geographically and militarily inaccessible to Ukrainian strike capability. The second layer was deterrence, make any attempt to penetrate Crimean defenses so costly in terms of failed attempts and exposed vulnerabilities that Ukraine would redirect its strike investments elsewhere. Both layers have failed. The denial layer failed when Ukrainian drones began reaching Crimean targets with increasing regularity and precision. The deterrence layer failed when Russia's inability to prevent successful strikes became publicly documented through satellite imagery and official Ukrainian after-action reporting. What you are watching unfold in real time is a military force, Russia, that built its southern strategic architecture on assumptions about its own defensive invulnerability, discovering that those assumptions were always wrong. The difference between 2022 and 2025 is not that Ukraine became capable of what Russia said was impossible. The difference is that Russia could no longer suppress or credibly deny the evidence that it had already become possible. Crimea is not a fortress anymore. It is a target, and the helicopters at Kirovsky are the evidence Russia cannot argue with. The question now is what the progressive loss of aviation, air defense, and logistics infrastructure in Crimea means for Russia's ability to sustain a credible military presence on the peninsula and project force from it into the broader southern theater. The answer to that question will not be settled in a single strike, even a strike as operationally significant as the one on June 28, 2025. It will be settled by whether Ukraine can sustain the attrition rate it has established and whether Russia can find a doctrinal answer to a strike methodology it has so far proven structurally unable to defeat. History will record that the battle for Crimea's strategic viability was not decided by a ground offensive. It was decided by the patient, systematic destruction of the infrastructure that made Crimea militarily useful in the first place. Stay with us because the operation against Russia's Crimean military architecture is far from finished, and the next development may be even more consequential than this one.